Well, thank you everybody for having me. I feel very privileged to be having you all listen to me of an evening, dedicating your Tuesday evening to myself, and thinking about company culture. So one thing I always ask people before I do any talk is to take a really deep breath and get in the zone with me and ask yourself if you're 100% here. So are you 100% in with me? Have you dropped the cat out of the room, kicked the kids in front of Netflix, whatever you've got to do? You're 100% here with me because this is exciting stuff. So I am Lizzie Benton, the founder of Liberty Mind, and I am very passionate about company culture and the impact they have on people and organisations. I have worked across the UK, from the vicinities of Wales all the way up to Leeds. I've been across the UK talking and educating and supporting businesses in improving their company culture. For anybody that is interested in learning more about company culture, I also do a podcast called Make It Thrive, the Company Culture Podcast. So wherever you get your podcasting fix, be that Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, anywhere at all, you will find the podcast there. And I interview lots of different businesses about their company cultures and also interview lots of other experts in regards to motivations, leadership, other specific topics in culture to help sort of, ignite a bit of a conversation. So if you do want to learn more, then do head over there. And you can also find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. So if you want to get in touch with me and get to know anything else, then please do just drop me a message. So tonight we're going to cover a few things. I want to really hammer home some of the common myths surrounding company culture and just get those out of the way so that we've got a clean slate to start from. I'm going to talk about why company culture is so important, especially right now, because let's face it, the Corona coaster, as they're calling it, is sending us in all sorts of directions. So sometimes we're feeling absolutely fine, other times we're in a complete meltdown. It's just madness. And right now, our company cultures need to support us, and we're going to really cover that and why that's important right now. We're also going to look at specifically what does building a conscious culture mean? So what are these words meaning and how can we do this in our cultures or in our micro teams, whatever we're doing in regards to people development and people support, how can we do that? So like I said, let's get on with some of these culture myths and the big things I hear that make me literally want to roll my eyes every time I hear them. So the first one is, let's be honest, culture is only the fun stuff. No. It is not the ping pong tables. It's not the bean bags. It's not the dominoes on a Friday. It is far more than the fun stuff. This is what I call the plaster perks. A lot of businesses would say, oh, I've got a great company culture. We do this, and I just think that you're literally sticking a massive plaster over something that's eventually going to crack when you decide to grow or develop your team. It's so much more than the fun stuff. Culture is only owned by HR. Again, this is something that is quite negative when it comes to company culture, because ultimately company culture needs to be owned and lived by everybody in the organization. It has to be led by leaders and managers and coaches. It has to be also engaged with the people who are going to be working in this culture. You need to get their feedback and engagement as much as possible as well. So yes, while HR might be the ambassadors, as we call it, for culture, ultimately they're not the only ones who own it. A lot of the time, honestly, the culture is actually owned by the collective, the people within the business. And that's the most important thing we need to try and encourage, is people speaking up and giving us feedback about what needs to be improved. Culture changes only need to happen once. No, definitely not. As we will have seen, even with what we've gone through recently, if a business has, made some drastic changes to their culture at the beginning of the year, that might put them in a very different position to what they're in now, which means culture has to change. It has to adapt. It's not something that's stagnant. It's something that has to consistently evolve and grow. So yes, by all means, like a massive transformation might only happen once, but actually it's always about progress, not perfection. You're never going to get this perfect culture. You've got to consistently think, how can I continue to improve and progress on this? The other big one I always get is it costs a lot of money to create strong company cultures. Again, this is a fallacy. At the end of the day, I've spoken to so many businesses at lots of different events who put very little into their company culture budget when things were going really badly. And actually, you know, they've enabled them to grow and gain sustainability. In fact, last year I was leading a workshop at the CIPD in Cumbria. I got invited to go along and do a workshop there. And I got speaking to a woman who basically their business was on its knees 5 years ago. They had to make some drastic cuts. They were almost at the point where they were thinking about making redundancies. They had to cut a lot of the workplace benefits. They had to really strip things back. And the one thing they put a lot of effort into was trying to think about culture and how they could improve things for people. And that then saw them excel and grow at that time. So actually, you know, I've heard it from people and I've seen it, that actually, you know, putting some time and effort and getting feedback from people is ultimately what we need to do to build a strong culture. It's even small things like communication and processes, things that people get really frustrated about, but because often culture gets deemed as just the fun stuff, people really forget about. There is only one right kind of culture. So I'm going to put the blame on Google and Facebook for this one, because, you know, with their slide and their pick and mix and every other cool quirk they've got going, you know, the bikes and everything, you know, if anyone's ever watched The Intern, you just watch that and think, I really want to work at Google. But, you know, that's their culture. It's very unique to them. So there isn't one right kind of culture. Every business has a very different mission and purpose. It has different values, and ultimately that is what should lead the company culture. There might be similarities in some ways, but there's not one right kind. You know, every business doesn't need to try and copy Google or Facebook. What you ultimately need to do is find something that really connects and engages with your mission and purpose and the values that you're living by, not just something that you've seen on the internet that looks really good fun and maybe we should try. So really think about how everything you're doing connects to those values and the bigger purpose that you're working towards. And my absolute favorite, because yes, culture is just the fluffy stuff. Culture has nothing to do with business goals. This, again, is completely false. Company culture, time and time again, is becoming a business metric. You know, people want engaged employees. People want to see reduced absenteeism, reduced presenteeism. All of these things matter to a business, how productive and efficient your business is running. So you can look at Harvard Business Review, you can look at all of the big sites, you know, Nielsen, Gallup, Deloitte, they're all doing massive surveys on the importance of company culture. You can read Forbes to see all the statistics. It matters to the business goals, because if you haven't got a driven and engaged team, they are not going to work towards your business goals. So it really does matter. So I really want to clarify exactly what company culture is, because there can be a little bit of confusion. I personally prefer this definition because I think it really connects to a lot of the work that I do. So company culture is how you do things in your business that encompasses your organization's values and purpose. And that is what I believe company culture is. It's not just saying something, it's actually believing and acting upon it within your organization. So I just want to go over why culture is important right now, because I think it's clear from a lot of the businesses that I'm working with and from some of the data that's out there at the moment that it is becoming incredibly more important. You know, you might be thinking to me, Lizzie, why are you talking about this fluffy stuff? There's like a deadly virus out there that's way more important. But honestly, right now, there is so much we need to look at when it comes to our workplaces. So number one is our teams are looking for security, guidance, hope, support, strong leadership. You know, company culture is hard work. You've got big businesses like Microsoft and Google and Adidas who invest billions of pounds into their company culture. And you know that, and the reason why is because they want a highly driven, highly motivated team, which is why company culture is an imperative to that. Right now, you know, people are feeling very uncertain at the work. You know, there's a lot of shifts going on. People have been on furlough for a very long period of time, you know, being out of work for 4 months, 5 months. That breeds a lot of uncertainty. And there's not been much to do during that time. It's not as though we've all had a jolly holiday somewhere. We've not all been, you know, maxing and relaxing. When we're not working, a lot of things happen. We can feel very demotivated. We can start to suffer with mental health issues. We can start to feel very lonely and isolated. Work actually serves a really strong purpose from an individual aspect. You know, we find a lot of meaning in our work. We find a lot of, you know, it helps us with our routine. It's really important to people. So you've got a lot of people who are very disconnected in the workplace right now. You also have the fear of redundancies as well. And that's another big part of it. That means our company culture needs to feel like everything's going to be okay. We're looking for security, guidance, support, strong leadership. Those are the things that right now we need to see in our company cultures. Number 2 is our customers are looking for a solution to their problem. A really great quote I heard recently, and I've got to share this with you, is people are looking for a painkiller, not a vitamin. And it's true. Everybody just wants a painkiller to their problem right now. We're fed up of buying vitamins. We just want something that's going to fix the problem. And people are really going to remember how you reacted in a crisis, how your business reacted in a crisis. I mean, I don't know if any of you have been following much of the news or Watchdog. I'm a sucker for Watchdog. You know, the press have been absolutely, you know, pulling out people and businesses that aren't supporting their customers. So you've got, you know, you've got wedding venues, you've got travel organizations. They're really getting investigated right now for how they're reacting to this situation. So it's important that you think about how you're reacting, because ultimately your values and your purpose will have been tested during this, because there is no better experiment, should we say, than you saying, oh, I really trust and care for people, than when you go through a crisis. It really highlights, you know, the good and the absolute worst. So when something like this happens, this is the perfect opportunity for your business to actually act in the way it needs to, under its values, under its mission and purpose. So really think about, you know, this is why culture is important, because ultimately it's not just a poster on the wall. You know, your values and your mission statement is not just some poster, not just some PR exercise. This is actually something you should be living and breathing in the everyday running of your business. So I wanted to just share a few snippets that I've seen recently in the press about businesses stepping up, shall we say, and helping out in the corona drama. I've also spoken to a lot of businesses who, because they've had a really good, strong culture, they've been able to adapt much better to this current situation that we find ourselves in. They've been able to go remote a lot quicker. Their teams have felt supported. For example, one organisation that I was working with in Milton Keynes, way before this happened, we implemented a third-party mental health counsellor. So all of the team have the opportunity to have a private, confidential mental health consultation. And because we've implemented that way before COVID, that has still enabled them to have a very supported team through this. So it just goes to show that sometimes, you know, when you've got the culture right, you've got those foundations right, when things start to happen, you can adapt much quickly. You can start to think about how these things are going to affect everybody in the organization. So I really wanted to just show that actually there are a lot of organizations doing quite well at the moment through this, and really stepping up and creating a lot of brand loyalty as well. Number 3 is what used to work is no longer going to work. let's face it, life has changed. You know, normally we'd all be doing this in a room. I'd be able to see all of your lovely faces, and we'd be able to have a chuckle at my silly gifts that I'm obsessed with, and it would all be very good fun. But instead we're doing it online. This is the new normal, I suppose, that everybody keeps saying. And we're all going through a very challenging time, whether that's in your business or your personal life. In some way, shape or form, this pandemic is hugely influencing our decisions, triggering our fears and making us feel fragile sometimes. And this means our team in particular, you know, are going to feel this, and what might have worked back then, you know, maybe even 6 months ago, is not going to work now. So at the moment, especially, you know, working hours will be questioned, how people manage their work, the roles and responsibilities we have in organizations and the way we operate, and your actions and behaviors as a business as well. You know, there's so much change going on, and we really need to look at how we can adapt. And the biggest thing that we'll need to adapt is our company cultures. So these are a few things that I found on social media recently that I've really enjoyed looking at, and I think it's really important. Obviously, we're kind of going through some kind of switch over to normal right now. I know a lot of people are going back into work. I know a lot of people are implementing health and safety right now to move people back into work. But one of the big things that I've heard a lot of people saying is, actually, you know, I've really enjoyed this time. I've really enjoyed the flexibility. I've saved so much money from commuting all the time. I've really enjoyed spending time with my family and having a bit of work-life balance rather than all that commuting. So some people have really embraced this time as a bit of a self-reflection of what they actually want from their work life. And I think especially as we start to move out of this, hopefully, we really need to set some boundaries and start thinking about what it is we want from our workplace, because it's outdated, it's archaic, it's set in too many outdated ways. You know, the reason we work 8 hours was set in the 1800s. We're working 200 years out of date. So we need to change. We need to adapt dramatically. So there's a few big changes we will see in the world. These are a few trends that I kind of want to bring your attention to, because ultimately anything that happens in the world, as we have seen with COVID, will impact your company culture. So like we've seen, there is a big rise in online and digital businesses. People are taking things online. People are wanting to connect via Zoom, via other methods, and this will see a big rise in online digital businesses. People are planning more short-term rather than long-term. A lot of the time where we would perhaps, you know, plan in advance with holidays and things like that, we're actually thinking a bit more short-term now because we're a bit unsure about what's going to happen. There's still a bit of uncertainty. So actually we've got to plan a lot more short-term than long-term. People are also investing in self-knowledge. So a lot of there's been some big data, and I haven't put it on these slides, but I will find it. But there's some big data out there about self-learning and the knowledge sector. So while people have had all this great time on furlough, a lot of people have been developing their skills, doing online courses, taking part in coaching. Lots of people have actually been doing a lot of self-work. So there's been a huge rise in this area. In fact, I've got a lot of friends who are wellness coaches, well-being coaches, life coaches, and they've had an incredible amount of business over this time because people are reflecting on what they want to do in the future and think, actually, I'm ready for a bit of a change. So there's been a big area in this, which means, especially in terms of learning and development in our company culture, we're really going to have to start stepping things up. We're really going to have to start offering and providing good learning and development opportunities. And of course, we're going to start looking at prevention planning. I think before, when people used to think about prevention planning or future-proofing their business or their company culture, it kind of felt a bit silly. I attended a great talk by Debbie Sarayan, who is a future strategist. So basically, she ultimately helps businesses plan for the future. And she said one of the really interesting things is that a lot of businesses don't do enough future proofing. You know, they all see it as a bit silly, as a little bit of a waste of time, a waste of money. But ultimately, as extreme as some of those situations may sound, sometimes, you know, the prevention planning and future planning and looking ahead is important to prepare for now, because, you know, we could have kind of predicted COVID was coming to the UK, but we were a little bit like, no, that's happening over there, that will never happen to us here. We were a little bit naive, but actually, if we'd have taken some time to strategize and think about the future, think about what's coming, it might even be things, you know, environmental changes that are going to happen. We haven't even considered anything like that yet. So we have to start considering how these things will then start impacting our company cultures. So the big question I always get from people is, where does culture change come from? Is it pain or is it positive influence? Because a lot of the time, these are the two strongest factors that we initiate change from. These are the two places. So pain is where there's a discomfort or an annoyance or a frustration. This even happens in our life when we're not happy with something, we want to change it. You know, there's a pain, there's a difficulty, so we change. Positive influence is normally when we aspire to something. We see something that we like and maybe we want to try and attain it. So that's where we come from. So company culture really does come from those two places. Right now, what I'm seeing is that actually company culture changes are coming from a place of pain, because people are disconnected in the workplace, people are really demotivated, people are trying to figure out new communication processes and working processes that are new to working from home. So there's a lot of pain going on in company culture right now that people are trying to solve. A lot less positive influence, because we're not in that happy place where we're kind of aspiring to go to that next level. So what does building a conscious culture mean? So I thought I'd just give the dictionary definition, just so that we're all working on the same page. So the definition that I'm going to work from on today's talk is: conscious is having an aware of and responding to one's surroundings and having knowledge of something. So like I say, I think it's really important when we come to company cultures, we're being aware of the influence your culture has on its people and its customers. So we always think that it has an influence on people, but also it has an influence on its customers as well. It has a much bigger ripple effect than you can imagine. A great example I will give is, I was working for a telecoms company last year, and I was helping them with some culture work. And one of the things that we found was that for some reason the customer service team were not able to give refunds for this particular project. They had to have it signed off by the manager. But there's only one manager, and the manager was on holiday, which meant no refunds could get done while this manager was on holiday, which therefore meant that, you know, a customer's getting really annoyed because they couldn't have their refund, which I totally understand. And then that meant they lost a customer. So that culture was, you know, unconsciously actually affecting its own customers because of the process they'd created, because of that silo they'd created. So ultimately, it does always impact your customers, even though you might not realize it. We also have to come from a place of recognition when something may need to shift or adapt. And this is very much about having that conscious mindset. We have to be really aware when something is triggering us and when something feels uncomfortable, and think about why that might be. You know, that is when we can then recognize that something might need to shift or adapt. Responding rather than reacting, because that's what a lot of businesses have done during this time, is respond to things really, really quickly and almost in a knee-jerk reaction, rather than taking a considered and a conscious approach in responding. And above all, for me, a conscious culture is asking about the big why. Why are you doing things that way? Why are you doing those benefits? Why are you creating that process? Why are you doing your communication in that certain way? There is so many whys that help us understand exactly what is expected of us in our company culture. So how do we build a conscious culture? It's all well and good talking about it, but now we want to put all of this to action and get moving with it. So I work predominantly with these 9 core elements of company culture. So because essentially the vision and values that we've got there at the front, at the beginning, is going to shine a light on all the other areas, because essentially your vision and your values are going to be threaded through all these other areas. Because we've not only got to talk the talk, but we've got to walk the walk. We can't just say we're really caring, but then not actually care when we get down to business. We need to actually act and live on it. So what I often say to people is sometimes, maybe take a screenshot of these 9 core elements, or come back to them and kind of rate yourself, rate your team or your business from 0 to 10. 0 being, we really need to sort this out, this we haven't even thought about, and 10 being, we've totally got this owned. So really think about, okay, on these areas, how well are we doing? And that will give you a really good overall score, because sometimes you might be really strong in learning and development, for example. You might be really strong in leadership, but where do you sit when it comes to your operations and your well-being? And even your recognition and reward. These are all things that I help businesses with, and it's really surprising sometimes where the cracks are, and it isn't until we lay it out, even in a really simple format like this, and sort of say, right, where are we winning and where are we losing, that we get to understand where the big drops are in the company culture. Like I said, number 1 is always your vision and values. These shine the light on the whole journey. You can't start on any other of the other 9 elements until you are 100% committed to that vision and values, because that is something you have to feel so passionately about that you are willing to dedicate time to implementing that in all the other areas, in all those other processes, and really getting down to the nitty-gritty areas. So one organization I always harp on about, and for anyone who often comes on any of my talks, I'm always talking about Patagonia. I don't actually wear the brand very often because I'm not that outdoorsy, but I absolutely love their company culture. So Patagonia, these are their core values. But Patagonia are an incredible company. So they started in the 1970s, actually building climbing clips. So that's all they produced originally in the 1970s. And they've since expanded their product range in sportswear and other types of outdoor sports equipment. But one of the big things that I absolutely love about Patagonia is from day one, they were committed to the environment. So they're huge environmentalists, and they're so committed to that passion and that purpose that so much of what they do in their business is actually geared towards promoting that. So for example, a lot of the time you won't see Patagonia taking adverts out on their products. They actually campaign a lot of the time for grassroots environmental causes. They also do things like give their employees time off to volunteer to campaign on environmental causes. So for example, they've even got a budget. So if you do get arrested for any reason, campaigning for your environmental cause, they will pay your bail up to a certain amount. So that is how dedicated they are to their company culture, that everything they do, their benefits, their advertising, how they source their products is all about environmentalism. Even the fact that they have the 1% to the environment. So I think it's gone up to 10%. So they commit a certain amount of their profit to environmental grassroots causes. So they really are incredibly passionate about environment, but it's all part of their culture. FAVI is also a really interesting case study to look at. So this sounds like a bit of an odd one. And I always like to mention FAVI because when anyone normally talks about company culture, they're talking about Google or Facebook or all the fun tech cool dudes. But actually, FAVI is a brass foundry in France. So the most far away company you can get from Google. They're engineering, that's what they do. They basically manufacture car parts, but they have an awesome company culture. So Jean-Francois Zobris became CEO of FAVI at a really difficult time, not dissimilar to where we are right now. The company was in financial turmoil, but instead of keeping this covered up, he stood up, told the entire factory, and together they came up with a solution to save everyone's job and keep the business going. So he didn't want to make people redundant. He didn't want to make losses. So he was very clear. He said, look, I'm going to have to make redundancies unless we come up with a financial solution to save the business. Otherwise, you know, this is going to happen. So all the team actually came up with the idea to take a reduced pay cut for 3 months and then review it after those 3 months to see if that would help the business. And it did. And now it is one of the most competitive car parts companies in the world. They have clients like Audi and Ferrari and all these other big brands. They compete hugely even with the Chinese market that can manufacture and mass produce car parts much quicker than they can. But because of their culture, because of how they work, they also run under what's called a self-managed organization. So there's a lot of autonomy involved in the company culture. So it's a fantastic one if you really want to extend your thinking in the realms of company culture. These are very much ahead of the time, and they have been for a long time. Oh, just go back one. So what I really want you to do when you're thinking about building this conscious culture is step one is ask if your vision and values are still relevant, and do you act on them? Because like we've seen with COVID and the massive changes that we've seen over the past 4 or 5 months, there is so much change that's happened, and what you're working towards in that vision and those values might still not be relevant, especially if it's very outdated, if it's very tradition based. It might be worth re-looking at it and even asking if people feel connected to those vision and values, because what you want is a team who are incredibly passionate and understand why they're doing what they're doing every single day. Number 2, get feedback from your team about how they feel about the existing company culture. Honestly, if it hurts right now in the company culture, it will kill you later. That's kind of what I say. It's like, if you think there's a crack now, it's only going to get bigger if you don't work on it. So it's really important to understand what's causing that big issue and try and work on it. The big thing as well, make small culture changes first. So when I asked you to kind of rate yourself out of those 9 core elements, after you've kind of gone over the vision and values and you feel really strong in that area, what I then say is then go through your higher areas. So say the areas that you maybe have between a 5 and a 9, between 5 and 10 are quite high. They're what I would call your quick wins. So what change or improvement could you make specifically in that area that could have a really good impact? Because that is where I'd put your attention first, because that will kind of turn the dial up nicely on your company culture. And then the big gaps, you know, the 5 to 0s is the stuff that is going to take a bit more work and a bit more time to improve. And number 4 is get to know what your people truly value. There is no point implementing things that no one's going to give a donkeys about, you know. Really understand what matters to people. I often give this example, but when I was working with one company, they had free cinema tickets for their staff, and I was like, that's great, but nobody's using them because everybody's got children, and in order to, you know, go to the cinema, it's going to cost 40 quid for a babysitter for the night. So that perk is totally useless. So it wasn't until, you know, we had these conversations with people that they were like, oh yeah, you know, all these fun perks we've implemented, 90% of them are completely useless and nobody values them. So get to know what people actually want in your company culture. Sometimes it's just extra holiday. A lot of the time people just want more of their own time. So get to know what it is and don't be afraid of what it is. You know, don't kind of go, oh no, we can't do that. I saw a great stream on Reddit the other day that said, an employee asked their manager, oh, I'm really overworked and stressed. Is there any way we can sort out time management? And they just put, try yoga. And it's like, this is it, isn't it? This is where we've got to. It's kind of like, let's not fix the problem, let's all just do yoga. That will just help everybody at work. You know, it's not about the processes, it's not that everybody's overworked and stressed. Okay, yoga's going to fix everything. I mean, I do yoga, but trust me, it doesn't fix everything. Number 5 is be transparent with your team. People really value honesty. So if there are cracks coming up, if there are some awkward conversations to have them, because the last thing you want is the office gossip going off, is the toxic workplace of fear and uncertainty all building up. Because as they say, the room knows the building, and those little kind of, you know, whispers soon get out. So be transparent with your team, and they will much more value their honesty. You know, you expect it from them, you expect them to be honest with you when they've made a mistake, so do them the courtesy of doing it back. Number 6 is don't copycat. Now is the time to act and behave on your mission and your values. If your mission and values are no longer relevant, like I say, it's perhaps time to change these, but don't copycat. Don't kind of look at the Googles and the Facebooks of the world. Get a bit more into other cultures that are doing more interesting things like FAVI and other brands like that. There are so many case studies I could share with you, and there are loads on my Liberty Mind website, because I just think it's really important that we stop putting this stereotype of it's only the tech companies doing culture really well. Actually, there's lots of other businesses doing really well. There's restaurants doing awesome cultures. There are so many sectors doing really well. It's not always just in tech. And you can learn things from those other businesses, you know, how they're adapting and how they're using their culture and what they're doing with their culture. You can even, you know, think about how that might work for you. So it's really important to become aware of what's out there rather than just what's in your own bubble. And number 7 is breed consciousness in your culture. Train people, support people, expand their personal skills rather than just their hard skills. There are so many things that we lack when it comes to our company cultures. We want people to have flexible working. Maybe we want them to, you know, feel less stressed or less overworked, but we don't help them in some of their soft skills. We don't help them to learn how to be more productive, to learn how to be more efficient. We don't help them to inspire their creativity. There's so much that we can do as humans, and we have such a vast potential. A lot of the time unknown potential. Sometimes, you know, we don't even give ourselves credit for the amount of stuff that we can do and the amount of things we can learn and the amount of how we can adapt. And that's what we need to start doing, is we need to start breeding this like human potential of creativity and innovation. Because, you know, as much as the robots are going to arrive very soon, they can't forward think everything. We need to try and do that. We've only got that history and that experience, that felt experience that can help us move forward. So like I said at the start, change happens. People, the world, technology, it's all coming. Like we've seen already with COVID-19, this was a massive change. And I'm really sorry if this triggers people, because I know change is a big triggering thing. But change is still going to happen. We're still going to see radical changes happen in our lifetime. We're going to see drastic environmental changes. We're going to see technology take over in ways we haven't even thought about yet. So we have to kind of get used to change and adapting. We have to make it part of our lifestyle and part of our company culture, because whatever happens out there in the world immediately impacts our businesses and what happens in them. So this is why we need to really keep thinking about how we can adapt and be more agile. So these are the 3 book recommendations I would really highly recommend you add to your Amazon wish list, or support your local bookshop, people. That's what I'm trying to do. All these Amazon deliveries that keep getting sent, honestly, dreadful. Support the indies, that's what I say. So honestly, just, you know, email your local bookshop. They can get these in for you easy. Or, you know, win them with an awesome post, like the guys have said. Go and win them. So book recommendations are, number 1 is Let My People Go Surfing. This is by the founder of Patagonia. He reveals his business story, why he wanted to save the environment, why he's done all these awesome things in his company culture. He's also very funny. He says it, I'll give you one quote from the book that I really enjoy, and he says, my worst nightmare is to come back as the marketing manager for Coca-Cola, a product nobody actually needs and a product that actually does more harm than good. So he's great. He's very good. Reinventing Organizations is the other one, by Frederick Laloux. Incredible book about the future of organizations. If you're really serious about taking company culture a step ahead, this is the future. It is very interesting because basically he talks a lot about, he mentions FAVI in there. He also talks a lot about, autonomous teams. This sounds crazy and like I'm a super hippie, but ultimately getting rid of the hierarchy. Boom, I put it out there. I just did that. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, Lizzie, that sounds like some kind of utopia, it's not. There are businesses out there working without hierarchy. It's something I'm actually trained in. So in January, I went over to Amsterdam and trained in self-managed teams and how to implement them in organizations. But I haven't launched that in the UK yet because people would be like, she's crazy talking about destroying the hierarchy. So yeah, that's something that I would highly recommend. And the last book isn't actually about culture. It's about being adaptable, and it's called Be More Human, or Be More Pirate, sorry. So this is actually about the history of pirates and how they created businesses, which sounds, again, a little bit unusual. But I found that these books are more future thinking than a lot of the other culture books that are out there. There's a lot of the culture books are still thinking very much about the now and not about what we've got coming. So highly recommend these three. And if you want to sort of get more of my juicy insights, I've got a free ebook on the Liberty Mind website. I've got step-by-step tasks on how to start going through your culture journey, case studies of real life culture success stories, and some ideas to stimulate your company culture. So that's completely free. So thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you have too. I hope I haven't triggered too many thoughts in your head thinking, oh my gosh, this woman is crazy. I'm very passionate about company culture, and I love helping people thrive in the workplace because I've seen the impact of it. I've seen how powerful it is. So if you have any questions as well, feel free to drop me an email at lizzie@libertymind.co.uk. But thank you so much for listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you. I know online round of applause isn't the easiest thing, but if you want to put an emoji or a thumbs up just to give some feedback to Lizzie and thank her for her time and her excellent insights. Really enjoyed that. I really like hearing about the FAVI case study. That was excellent. And this is the third time I've seen Lizzie, and I'm always impressed with her energy and obvious passion for the subject. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Tim.
As we said, if you can put questions in the chat, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break now. You can take the opportunity to post on LinkedIn if you like, using the hashtag Agile Northants, and we'll sort out giving one of the books away after the event. So we'll see you in about 5 minutes. And dive straight in. So first question is, some companies have teams of people who are responsible for the culture. How might you go about selecting people for that group, if you would at all?
Oh, fantastic question. Yes. I think it's really good to have a sort of a team, or, people that are involved with the company culture. I think what's really important as much as possible is trying to get people from different departments involved in that company culture, so that it's not all, for example, all the HR team involved. It's actually people from across departments. And ultimately, it's really good for people to actually show an interest in being part of those culture changes. So if possible, getting people to come and sort of talk about, what they'd like, or not audition, but, come and talk to the person that's spearheading it, and perhaps discuss why they're really passionate about the company culture and what they feel they can add to the mix, I suppose.
Great, thank you. If culture is most effective when tied to values and purpose, it seems critical to get the value and purpose right, which I think you alluded to later on in that. I think this is an early question.
Yeah.
Any tips for creating these, so the values and purpose?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So with the purpose, there's two ways to go around it. So you can think about what mission or goal is the company trying to achieve. So you can come at it from a very goal setting perspective. The other way to come at it, which I actually prefer sometimes, although it sounds quite negative, is to actually think about what are you as a company against.
Oh, wow.
So actually come from the opposite, because sometimes you want to get really passionate about something, but sometimes that can come from being frustrated or angry with things rather than thinking, oh, what am I really passionate about? Because even when you say to someone, what are you really passionate about? They go, oh, I don't know. But actually, if you ask them the opposite, because it's such a high energy, getting frustrated and angry about something, you'll see them rant on, go, oh, I don't like this. So, at Liberty Mind, for example, we're against traditionalism, the status quo, the ego, things that are negative for company cultures. So it's sometimes good to look at what you're against to help find out what you're actually for. So that's what I would say in regards to finding your purpose. There's a few good tips. The other thing around values is getting people to think about what actions or behaviours do they feel would help them achieve that mission or purpose. So what particular actions and behaviours are you trying to encourage? And what I'd really do as well with those actions and behaviours, those values essentially, is actually define them. So explain them, because a lot of businesses will say, oh, we have creativity and respect, or, they kind of pluck these values out of the air, but they never actually define them, which means everybody ends up taking them very subjectively. Whereas if you define and explain what that value means and what your expectation is, people will much better understand it. So for example, last year I worked with a charity who had a core value of creativity. But that's what it said, was just our core values are these 10 things, and one of them is creativity. Now, when we did the employee survey and did some auditing, we realized that the CEO, the founder of the charity, said in her eyes, creativity actually meant the physical act of creating something. So that was, creating paintings or something else like that. But actually the team were the complete opposite. They saw creativity as problem solving, which is, that's another version of creativity, being a problem solver. But that's not what she saw it as. So because they hadn't defined and explained that value, it was very subjective. So we had to work on actually explaining the expectation from people and why it was important to the charity.
Thanks, Lizzie. The next one is referring to, I think you were talking about this with coronavirus, and you're saying about future proofing. Okay. It says, the question is kind of future proofing what, and how far into the future should you future proof?
Oh, that is a juicy question. So I don't do a lot of future strategizing, if that's even a word. I'm starting to lose my words now. But essentially what you should do is try and sit together and think about some of the things that could potentially happen in the future. This includes things like getting really clear on, for example, if you sell a product and it's produced in X country, what happens if that country all of a sudden gets obliterated? What then happens? So it's kind of taking everything to the extreme. And it's looking at areas such as environmentalism. It's looking at areas such as, technology. So robots, what if all of a sudden robots, that becomes a thing, really easily accessible where everyone can do it. And really thinking about essentially what is the worst thing that could happen to your business if that happens. And it's looking at things like the news, and another really good like futurists to follow. So Rutger Bregman is a really big futurist about things that will happen in the future. Tapping into people like that who are making predictions to try and think about how you can then adapt. Because what you not only want to do is think about the outside world of the future changes that might happen, but also what can happen on the inside. What if someone builds a better product than yours? What if someone does something better? as Debbie Sarayan, the futurist I was speaking to, she sort of said, you know, it can only go so far when you buy out all your competitors, you know, because someone's now all of a sudden competing in your area. That can only last for so long. You then have to start innovating and catching up. And you know, it's like Kodak and Blockbusters. We've seen all of those not keep up, and this is what happens. They just become obsolete.
Yeah. You mentioned a few futurologists there. I missed the first one.
So yes, Rutger Bregman. So he's written a really good book as well called Utopia for Realists. So that's a book I'd highly recommend.
Sorry, just making a note.
I'll email you their names as well, Tim, because
thank you, Lizzie.
they're all yeah, slightly difficult to spell if you can't.
Next question. More and more companies seem to be closing up their offices. How might a company's identity change to not having a common location as a result? Yeah,
definitely. It's a big one at the moment, because I think so many company cultures have lent on their office space as being their culture. So a lot of businesses have gone, oh, we've got the foosball table, and we've got these funky office graphics, and you know, we've got all these kind of Google-esque things. When all of that is stripped away, that is when your company culture really shows, because you're no longer leaning on those physical assets, those materialistic objects to be your culture. And you know, those plaster perks, as I call them, are going to go away, and they're going to realize that actually they haven't worked enough on their culture, which is much more than just, as I've covered, those plaster perks. It's all the other things, like the way you communicate to people and lots of other integral parts of culture that they'll need to work on. And it will change cultures hugely. Not that a lot of those places were really creating a culture anyway, because a lot of the businesses I know that have built places like that have said, you know, people have said, oh, well, I'm too busy working for me to be allowed to go and play ping pong or something. Like, it's just completely useless. Those items don't actually matter. So I think people are going to start looking a lot more internally at how their culture works, how they communicate with each other, how they support learning and development and well-being, even things down to talking about failures and successes. And, you know, I was speaking to a friend even recently, and she used to think she worked at a really good company culture. And she's like, oh no, we have a great company culture here. I mean, I can immediately see the cracks. Like, I have, you know, I know, I can just tell. And then, you know, something happened the other week, and I was like, kind of like, well, I could have told you so, but I didn't want to say anything, because, you know, they dealt with this issue really badly. And I was like, wow, you know, as soon as something negative happens, their culture has changed and they've gone completely flipped. So it's almost like their culture was actually more of a PR stunt, and a bit, you know, a very outward facing, like, this is how we look, not actually internally, this is how we deal with things, this is how we manage problems and how we support each other. And it's just very obvious from the get-go, those that have got very materialistic outward PR type cultures, and those who've actually got very strong inward cultures.
Yeah, good answer. I saw a few people nodding when you were saying about the perks that they just don't have time to use.
Yeah.
I think that resonated with a few people. You got time for a few more questions, Lizzie?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So how should, I think you've talked about this a little bit anyway, but how should you create / design a culture without it being too artificial and make it stick?
Yeah, really good one. As much as possible, like I sort of tried to allude to in my talk, is get people involved. So it's really important that people actually feel passionately and excited about the values and the culture they're living and breathing. A lot of the time what I see when people try and create a culture is a very top-down approach. So it's like, well, this is how it's going to be, and it's very do as I say, you know, not as I do kind of situation. And that kind of hierarchical BS is just dying a death. It just doesn't work. People don't feel engaged by it. People don't feel excited by it. And actually what we need is to get people talking and feeding back. And it's even simple things like, you know, the age-old suggestion box, the black hole of ideas, where people go, oh, we've got a suggestion box. It's like, great. And then what happens with all those ideas? Who takes them forward? Who actions them? There's a really cool company in Australia called Quirk Marketing, And as well as obviously doing sort of annual surveys and things like that, they have what they call a specific feedback process. So if you've got an input about the company culture, anyone can contribute to their company culture, a change or an idea. And they have this big kind of board in their organization. And in order for you to pitch your company culture idea or your suggestion, you have to find a couple of people to agree with you, because let's be honest, when we come up with an idea, sometimes we think it's great already. We're like, this is the best idea ever. It's not until you talk to other people, they're like, have you thought about this? And you're like, oh, no, I didn't. So sometimes it's good to get, you know, your tribe together to understand your idea. So you've got collective input. Then you have to pitch it, you know, go and present it to the CEO, what you think this is about. And then you either get told, yep, go and action that company culture change. Like, you as the person who suggested it, you go and action that. Or it goes to what they call the graveyard of ideas. But what happens in the graveyard is they list out why that idea can't go through right now. And everybody is aware of the ideas that didn't make it, so that everyone knows what could get passed and what can't get passed right now. Or, okay, that didn't get passed 6 months ago, but maybe we could try it again because it's a few months ahead. It's really about getting as many people involved in that change as possible and creating systems like that. And it sounds very processy driven and system, but when people know how to take action, they'll engage with it and they'll take part in it. The big trouble is, in a lot of company cultures, nobody knows how to have an input. There's just some random survey that goes out, you answer a few questions, you get really frustrated because nothing ever changes. And that's the process that a lot of businesses will take at the moment. It's kind of like an easy get out of jail free card. Like, oh, well, we send the employee survey, so everyone should be fine. It needs more than that. So I definitely say create processes that are going to engage with people to take part in the culture as much as possible.
There's almost a follow-up question to that. I think it's from someone else, but it kind of says, how as a junior member of the team can you have influence on your company culture when you have limited power within the team itself?
Definitely. I always say everybody from literally the CEO to like the intern should have some kind of involvement in shaping the company culture, because you need diversity of thought and you need diversity of ideas to shape something that's future-proof. You can't just have the same type of people, like a copycat of everyone coming up with the same ideas and lots of yes men in the room. That's never going to work, because it's never going to work in creating good products for your customers, because your customer is not just one person. They have lots of varied experiences themselves. So it's important that you also encompass that within your business. And also the life cycle of people in your business changes. So you need to ensure that as a company culture, you are supporting people at every single step in their life. You know, people come in at maybe, you know, their 20s, in their first job. You know, are you supporting everybody at their different life stages, when they're buying their first home, when they're having their children, when they're looking at retirement? We are reaching a place where we are going to have the most multi-generational workforce in our entire lives. And if cultures can't support everybody, we're going to start seeing a massive lack in diversity. So it's really important that you do get everybody involved as much as possible.
I think you've just answered the next question as well.
Mind reader.
Yeah, because someone did ask, how do you influence company culture to adapt to support people in the minority? And I think it's about getting their input, right?
Yeah, 100%, definitely. Because it's not just, it's not just about the age thing. It's also, you know, when I was speaking recently, there's been a lot in the press about sort of Black Lives Matter and things like that, which is very, very important in company culture. But it's also important to consider things like neurodiversity. So ensuring that your business is also supporting those with neurodiverse needs. So with dyslexia, autism, ADHD, anything like that, because even that is a massive gap. I recently interviewed a neurodiversity consultant. She specifically works with businesses to make sure they're adaptable to neurodiverse needs. And she said, you know, a lot of the time it takes 2 years for somebody to get a role at a company, because it's not just gaining the confidence to go and apply for a job, it's also the limitations that are immediately there. If someone's dyslexic, they're not going to be able to fill out your online application form. So you really need to understand everybody's needs within the business as much as possible.
Really great answer. Thank you, Lizzie. I think we'll call it there on the questions, just to let you rest your voice a little bit, Lizzie. But once again, can you just join me in showing your appreciation for Lizzie giving up her time this evening and coming to talk to us about company culture? Thank you so much, Lizzie.
Thank you all so much for having me and for such awesome questions. Love them.
Awesome.